Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku created his own superhero team in the Marvel Universe. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. Pain was the first anchor. A deep, thrumming agony that radiated from his bones, a familiar but unwelcome companion that dragged him from the swirling vortex of non-being. It wasn't the sharp, clean pain of a well-placed blow, or the searing heat of an explosion. This was the dull, exhaustive ache of a body pushed far beyond its limits, the kind of pain that settled deep into the marrow and whispered of utter collapse. Izuku Midoriya groaned, the sound of rough rasp in his throat. His cheek was pressed against something cold, gritty, and damp. The smell was a nauseating cocktail of stagnant water, rotting garbage, and something vaguely metallic, like old blood. He forced an eye open. Darkness. No, not complete darkness. A sliver of bruised, purple-gray light bled from high above, illuminating the oppressive brick walls that boxed him in. An alleyway. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. Every fiber of his being felt overdrawn, like a wire that had carried too much current for too long. His hero costume, once a vibrant symbol of hope, was a testament to the war he had just been ripped from. The green fabric was shredded and scorched, particularly around his forearms and shins. The metal plates of his iron soles were dented and scraped, one of them sparking feebly. His mask was gone, likely lost in the chaos, and his red gloves were torn, revealing bruised and bloodied knuckles. The pale yellow cape, a precious gift from Gran Torino, was a tattered ruin, hanging off one shoulder like a broken wing. He leaned against the grimy brick, his breath coming in ragged pants. He tried to access the vestiges within One for All, to seek their counsel or comfort, but there was only a profound, humming silence. It was like shouting into an empty room. The power was there, a familiar sun of energy warming his core, but the voices, the presences of his predecessors, were gone. A cold knot of fear, colder than the damp pavement, tightened in his stomach. Where am I? What happened? Memory returned not as a stream, but as violent, disjointed shards. The battlefield. The mud, the smoke, the screams. The hulking form of a Hyan Noma. The desperate faces of his friends, Uraraka, her cheeks streaked with soot, Ida, his armor cracked, Todoroki, steam and frost billowing from his body in a chaotic dance. They were holding a defensive line, buying time. For what? For him. He remembered lunging, the green lightning of 20% full cowling crackling around him. He was a comet of righteous fury, aimed at a new threat. A villain all for one had sprung from the depths of Tartarus. This one wasn't a powerhouse of raw destruction. His name was something ridiculous. Parallax? Kaleidoscope? Deku couldn't recall. His quirk was the problem. Reality around him had begun to warp and shimmer, like a heat haze on asphalt. Colors bled into one another, the sound of battle distorted into a dissonant symphony. The villain had grinned, a rictus of madness on his face, his eyes swirling with impossible hues. You want to be a symbol? He had shrieked, his voice echoing from multiple directions at once. Let's see how symbolic you are in a world that never asked for you. A flash. Not of light, but of everything. A nauseating plunge through a kaleidoscope of existence. A feeling of being unmade and remade 1,000 times a second. He remembered reaching out with Black Whip, trying to anchor himself to something, anything, but his tendrils found no purchase. They simply dissolved into the chromatic chaos. Then nothing, until the pain, the cold, and the grime of this alley. Izuku staggered to his feet, using the wall for support. His utility belt was mostly intact. He checked the pouches, a few pellets of concentrated food rations, a roll of high-tensile wire, and his analysis notebooks. He pulled one out. Number 14. The cover was smeared with dirt, but the pages were dry. He clutched it to his chest, a small piece of home in this terrifyingly unknown place. The alley opened onto a street. Hesitantly, he limped towards the light, his senses on high alert. He braced himself for the sight of a ruined city, for the smoke-choked skies of a world at war. What he saw instead struck him with a sense of vertigo more disorienting than any villain's quirk. The city was whole. Towering buildings of glass and steel pierced a sky that was a clean, pale blue, dotted with lazy white clouds. The air was thick with the sounds of life, the blare of a horn unlike any he'd heard before, a cacophony of voices speaking a language that was tantalizingly familiar yet peppered with strange cadences and slang, the distant wail of a siren with a completely different pitch. People, hundreds of them, thousands, swarming the sidewalks. They were dressed in a dizzying array of styles, their faces buried in glowing rectangles of glass they held in their hands. They were laughing, talking, rushing, living. There was no fear in their eyes. No tension in their shoulders. No sign of the oppressive dread that had blanketed Japan for months. This wasn't just a city that had been rebuilt. This was a city that had never been broken. He stumbled out of the alley's mouth, a ghost in tattered green amidst a vibrant, living world. People gave him a wide berth, their expressions shifting from curiosity to alarm to disdain. He heard snippets of their conversation. Whoa, look at that guy. Bad Halloween party? Is he homeless? Someone should call a cop. Dude, that's some intense cosplay. Bet he's heading to a convention. Cosplay. The word felt like a slap. This costume was soaked in his blood, sweat, and tears, a uniform earned through pain and sacrifice. Here, it was a joke, a costume. He looked up, trying to find a landmark, anything familiar. And then he saw it. A massive, gleaming tower that dominated the skyline, a stylized emblazoned on its side. He'd never seen it before in his life. He scanned the street signs. The letters were the same, but the names were foreign. Broadway. West 42nd Street. He was speaking Japanese to himself, his muttering habit kicking into overdrive. Okay, Midoriya, think. Analyze. This is a targeted teleportation quirk. He must have sent me to a different country. America? The language is English, but it's different. The accents, the slang, everything is off. He was alone. Truly, utterly alone. A wave of despair so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over him. All Might. His mom. Uraraka. Ida. All of them, were they safe? Did they win? Or did his disappearance turn the tide of the battle? The thought was a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He couldn't afford to break down. Not here. Not now. He was a hero. He had to act like one. First step, gather information. Second step, find a way back. His train of thought was shattered by a sudden, sharp scream. Down the street, in the mouth of another, wider alley, a scene was unfolding that was tragically familiar. Two men had a couple cornered against a wall. The couple looked like tourists, clutching a map and wearing brightly colored clothes that screamed not from here. One of the assailants was a large, brutish man with a shaved head. The other was wiry and nervous, brandishing a wicked-looking flick knife. Just give me the wallet and the watch, pal, the wiry one hissed, his eyes darting around. And the lady's purse. Nice and easy. The husband, a man with a kind but terrified face, tried to shield his wife. Please, just take the money. Don't hurt us. People on the sidewalk were stopping, staring. Some pulled out their phones, not to call for help, but to record. A bubble of inaction had formed around the crime, a sphere of detached observation. It was a phenomenon Deku had studied, the bystander effect. But seeing it in person, the coldness of it, made his blood run cold. In his world, a pro-hero would have been on the scene in seconds. But here, there was nothing. Just fear and phones. His body moved before his brain could protest. The internal debate was a footnote, a flickering spark of hesitation extinguished by years of ingrained instinct. No license. Unknown laws. Dangerous quirk. Doesn't matter. They're in trouble. A hero saves people. He pushed off the balls of his feet, activating One for All, full cowling at a controlled 5%. The world didn't slow down so much as he sped up. The cacophony of the city faded into a dull roar. The faces of the bystanders became blurry streaks. To them, he was a sudden gust of wind, a flicker of green lightning that erupted from the crowd. He covered the 30 feet to the alley in less than a second, his movements precise and economical. He didn't aim for the man, but for the weapon. As he closed the distance, he channeled the power of One for All into the fingers of his right hand. This wasn't a smash. It was surgery. Delaware smash. The name was a whisper, a force of habit. He didn't punch. He flicked. His middle finger, reinforced by the power of his predecessors, struck the air just in front of the knife-wielding thug's hand. The resulting blast of compressed air was a miniature cannonball, invisible, silent, and overwhelmingly powerful. It made a sharp thwump sound, like a giant snapping his fingers. The thug yelped in shock as the knife was torn from his grasp, his fingers suddenly numb and tingling. The blade spun through the air and embedded itself deep into the wooden frame of a dumpster with a solid thunk. Before either of the criminals could react, Deku was on them. He used the momentum of his flick to pivot on his heel, his left leg scything out in a low, controlled sweep aimed at the larger man's ankles. It wasn't a kick meant to break bones, but to unbalance. The big man went down with a surprised grunt, his large frame hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. The entire confrontation took less than 3 seconds. Deku stood between the criminals and the couple, his stance low and ready. The green energy of full cowling crackled around him, a visible aura of contained power. He looked at the two thugs, his eyes, normally soft and kind, now burning with a fierce, protective intensity that promised a world of hurt if they made another move. "Leave," he said, his voice steady and low, the single English word carrying an undeniable weight of authority. The wiry thug stared at his numb hand, then at the knife buried in the dumpster, and finally at the glowing green boy who had appeared out of thin air. Fear, raw and primal, replaced the aggression in his eyes. He scrambled to his feet, helped his larger companion up, and they both fled down the alley without a backward glance. Silence descended. The tourist couple stared at him, their mouths agape. The crowd of onlookers was frozen, their phones still held aloft, but their expressions had changed from detached interest to utter shock and awe. They hadn't just seen a vigilante stop a mugging, they had seen something impossible, a display of speed and power that was utterly effortless and terrifyingly precise. "Are you two all right?" Deku asked, letting the green aura fade as he turned to the couple. He kept his voice soft, trying to be reassuring. The woman nodded, clutching her husband's arm. "Yes, thank you." What are you?" Before Deku could even begin to formulate an answer, the crowd began to buzz. Whispers turned into excited chatter. "Did you see that? He didn't even touch him. Is he one of the Avengers? I've never seen him before." "New hero?" The attention was a physical weight. He wasn't used to this. In his world, a hero's appearance was expected, welcomed. Here, he was an anomaly, a spectacle. He felt a desperate urge to flee, to find another dark alley to hide in and figure things out. "Hey! You!" A voice cut through the murmur. It was young, female, and held a note of genuine curiosity, not fear. He turned to see a girl pushing her way through the front of the crowd. She looked to be about his age, maybe a year younger. She was Pakistani-American, with warm, intelligent eyes and a friendly face. She was wearing a simple jacket, jeans, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. In one hand she held a half-eaten hot dog. That was incredible," she said, her eyes wide with an admiration that was both sincere and analytical. "The way you moved, the control you had. You displaced the air to disarm him, right? A concussive blast, but focused. Like super focused. I've never seen anyone do that. Not even Cap throws his shield with that kind of pinpoint, air-flicking thingy." Deku blinked, taken aback by the rapid-fire analysis. It was almost like listening to himself. Thank you," he managed, his English feeling clumsy and formal. "I'm glad I could help." The girl took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Are you okay? Your costume, it looks like you've been through a war." Her observation was so astute, so close to the bone, that it momentarily stunned him. For the first time, he looked at her properly. There was an earnestness in her expression, a deep well of empathy that he recognized instantly. It was the look of a true hero. He didn't know what to say. The truth was too insane. A lie felt wrong. "You look lost," she said softly, her voice kind. "Like really, really lost. Not just can't find the subway lost, but... What planet am I on lost?" He couldn't help the small, wry smile that touched his lips. "Is it that obvious?" "Kinda," she admitted with a sheepish grin. "Look, my name is Kamala. Are you hungry?" You look like you could use a hot dog. And maybe a non-grimy place to sit for 5 minutes. This simple offer of kindness, of food and rest, almost broke the dam of his composure. To be seen not as a threat, or a spectacle, or a freak, but just as a person who needed help, it was a lifeline. Midoriya Izuku, he replied, giving his name in the traditional Japanese order. He then corrected himself, remembering where he supposedly was. Izuku Midoriya. And yes. I would like that very much. Kamila's grin widened. Cool. There's a cart just around the corner that has the best chili dogs. My treat. You totally earned it with the you-know. She mimed a flicking motion with her fingers. He was about to follow her when a new sound cut through the air, sharp and piercing. The screech of tires. 4 identical black SUVs, sleek and unmarked, swarmed the intersection with terrifying speed and precision. They boxed in the area, their doors flying open before they had even come to a complete stop. Men and women in dark, tactical gear poured out, moving with a fluid, disciplined grace that spoke of intense training. They carried advanced-looking rifles, holding them in a low-ready position, their movements economical and professional as they formed a perimeter around the alley's entrance. The crowd, which had been buzzing with excitement, now gasped and fell silent, backing away with a new kind of fear. This wasn't a show anymore. This was serious. Deku's body tensed, instinct screaming at him. This was law enforcement, but not the kind he knew. They moved like a specialized military unit. His mind raced. Villains? A government agency? I have no context. Do not engage. Do not escalate. Kamala grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with alarm. Oh, crud. That shield, she whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of awe and dread. The big guys. One of the SUV's rear doors opened. A woman stepped out, and the air around her seemed to grow colder. She had a severe, no-nonsense haircut, and a gaze so sharp and penetrating it felt like it could strip the secrets from your soul. She wore a dark, practical uniform, a holstered pistol on her hip. She moved with an unshakable confidence, the agents parting before her like water before the prow of a ship. She stopped about 15 feet away, her eyes locking onto Deku. She scanned him from head to toe, her expression unreadable but intensely analytical. Her gaze lingered on the scorch marks on his costume, the flickering sparks from his boot, and the exhausted but defiant set of his jaw. We registered a massive, unique energy spike in this location, the woman said, her voice calm, level, and utterly commanding. It was a voice that didn't request obedience, it expected it. Coinciding with your little display of civic duty. Deku felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The energy spike, she meant one for all. They could track it. That was a terrifying thought. That was a level of technology far beyond what he was used to. He instinctively moved to place himself slightly in front of Kamala, a subtle, protective gesture. The woman's eyes flickered to the movement, a hint of something, not quite approval, but acknowledgement, in their depths. She took another step forward, her hand resting casually near her sidearm. The agents tensed, their rifles shifting almost imperceptibly. The message was clear. They could end this before he could even blink. The Sokovia Accords require any and all enhanced individuals to be registered and accounted for, she stated, the words cold and hard as steel. You are not on any list I've ever seen. Your energy signature doesn't match any known powered individual on this planet. And that costume of yours isn't exactly standard issue. She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the tense air. The city, which had felt so vibrant and alive moments ago, now seemed to be holding its breath. Deku's mind was a maelstrom of confusion. Sokovia Accords? Registration? This was a nightmare. This was the ideological war that had torn his own society apart, but it was already codified and enforced here with chilling efficiency. The woman fixed him with her unwavering stare, a stare that had likely intimidated gods and monsters. So, I'm going to ask you some questions, and you're going to give me some straight answers. Her gaze hardened, and the finality in her tone was absolute. All right, kid. Who are you, and where in the hell did you come from? The transition from the chaotic, sensory overload of the New York street to the stark, sterile silence of the SHIELD facility was jarring. One moment, Izuku Midoriya was a strange spectacle, surrounded by the curious and the fearful. The next, he was an asset, a problem, a piece on a board he didn't know the rules of. He hadn't resisted. Years of training under pro heroes, even the gruff ones like Aizawa, had instilled in him a deep, albeit conditional, respect for authority. Running would have branded him a threat, and fighting was unthinkable. So he had gone quietly, leaving a very concerned Kamala Khan standing on the sidewalk with a half-eaten hot dog and a million questions. He now sat in a room that was the physical embodiment of nothingness. The walls, floor, and ceiling were a seamless, matte white material that swallowed sound. There was no window, no decoration, only a simple gray table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. The air was cool, dry, and tasted faintly of ozone. He knew, with the certainty of someone who had studied countless hero-villain confrontations, that he was being observed through a one-way mirror or hidden cameras. His tattered costume felt garish and out of place in the monochromatic chamber. The door hissed open, and the severe-looking woman from the street entered. She moved with the same unnerving efficiency, placing a thin datapad on the table. She didn't sit, choosing instead to stand, reinforcing her position of authority. "I am Deputy Director Maria Hill," she said, her voice as flat and unyielding as the walls. "And you are currently in a secure shield-holding facility. You are not under arrest, but you are not free to leave. Do you understand?" Izuku nodded, his throat dry. "Yes, ma'am." His formal Japanese upbringing translated into a politeness that seemed to slightly wrong-foot the hardened agent. "Good," Hill continued, her eyes narrowing. "Let's try this again. Who are you?" He took a breath. Lying was not in his nature, and in this situation, the truth, however insane, was his only real currency. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. I am a hero in training from Japan." Hill's lips thinned into a line that was not quite a frown, not quite a smirk. "There are no UA high schools in Japan, Midoriya. No government-sanctioned hero programs that churn out teenagers with the kind of power you displayed. We would know. That's because—" "I don't think I'm in my Japan," he said, the words feeling fragile and absurd as he spoke them. "Or my world at all. The last thing I remember, I was fighting a villain. His ability, his quirk, it manipulated reality. There was a flash, and then I was here." Hill was silent for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. She was a human lie detector, and Izuku could feel her weighing every word, every twitch of his expression. He met her gaze directly, channeling every ounce of sincerity he possessed. He had to make her believe him. "A quirk?" she prompted. "It's what we call our powers," he explained, feeling a familiar comfort in the act of analysis and explanation. "About 200 years ago, the first person was born with a metahuman ability, a quirk. Now, roughly 80% of the global population possesses some kind of unique power. Society rebuilt itself around this reality. We have schools to train young people with strong quirks to become pro-heroes, licensed by the government to protect civilians and combat villains." He spoke of All Might, the symbol of peace, of the hero ranking system, of the catastrophic rise of All for One and the subsequent war. He explained it all with the earnest, detailed clarity of a student presenting his thesis. It was his life. It was the only reality he knew. Hill listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When he finally finished, the silence that followed was heavy and absolute. "Extra-dimensional incursion," she finally stated, as if reading a heading from a report. "Not the first time, won't be the last. But your story has a few problems. Namely, the energy signature." She tapped her datapad. "When you used your quirk, we picked up a massive surge. But our analysts are stumped. It wasn't psychic, cosmic, or gamma-based. It didn't match any known energy profile. What exactly is your power, Midoriya?" This was the hard part. The sacred secret. But All Might was a world away. The vestiges were silent. The rules had changed. "My quirk is called One for All," he said quietly. "It's a power that is passed down from one person to the next, growing stronger with each new user. It stockpiles power. The user can then release that stockpiled power, granting them superhuman strength, speed, and agility." Hill raised an eyebrow. "Passed down? Like a torch? How?" By ingesting the current user's DNA, Izuku said, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. He still remembered choking down that strand of All Might's hair on that beach so long ago. Hill's stoic expression finally cracked. A corner of her mouth twitched. You have got to be kidding me. She shook her head, as if clearing it of the sheer absurdity. All right, let's say I'm entertaining this alternate reality, Hero's School, power passing by ingestion theory. You got any proof? Proof. He looked down at his ruined gloves, at his battered body. Then he remembered. Yes, he said, his voice gaining a spark of hope. My notebooks. He reached for his utility belt. Instantly, a voice from an unseen speaker filled the room. Hold. Do not make any sudden movements. Hill held up a hand. It's all right. Let's see what he's got. Slowly, carefully, Izuku unclipped the pouch and pulled out Hero Analysis for the Future, number 14. It was slightly damp, the cover smeared with grime, but it was intact. He slid it across the table. Hill picked it up with a practiced, careful motion, as if it might be a bomb. She opened it. Her expression of professional skepticism slowly began to melt away, replaced by one of genuine, unadulterated shock. The pages were a chaotic but brilliant explosion of information. Frantic, detailed sketches of heroes and villains, people she had never seen before. Mount Lady, Kamui Woods, Endeavor. Each drawing was surrounded by dense, analytical notes written in Japanese. Arrows pointed to costume materials, support gear, and weak points. There were complex diagrams breaking down the physics of certain powers, speculation on their ultimate potential, and strategies for both teamwork and counters. It wasn't a diary. It was a doctoral thesis on a world of superhumans that S.H.I.E.L.D. had no file on. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the meticulous details. She paused on a detailed breakdown of Eraserhead, complete with notes on line of sight and the blink weakness. Then a multi-page analysis of Katsuki Bakugo's explosion quirk, with chemical diagrams of his nitroglycerin-like sweat and thermodynamics charts. This is... She began, then stopped, searching for the right word. Obsessive. It's my hobby, Izuku said, a little defensively. I believe that to be a great hero, you have to understand power, not just have it. Hill closed the notebook, her mind clearly racing. This wasn't something a person could fake. The sheer volume and depth of the analysis, the consistent internal logic of this quirk-based society. It was too detailed, too coherent to be a delusion. This notebook was the single most compelling piece of evidence for an alternate reality she had ever seen. She tapped her comms unit. Get a linguistics team to translate this. Every page. And get Dr. Eris down here with a full-spectrum scanner. I want a complete biological and energetic workup on our guest. Now. She looked back at Izuku. You're going to stay here while we verify a few things. The verification process took hours. A small, hovering medical drone took blood samples, skin scrapings, and hair follicles. Dr. Eris, a balding man with kind eyes and an expression of perpetual curiosity, scanned him with a device that hummed and glowed with soft blue light. He spent a long time focused on Izuku's right arm, the one that bore the worst of the scars from his early, uncontrolled smashes. Fascinating, Eris muttered, looking at his datapad. His cellular structure shows evidence of repeated, catastrophic damage and subsequent regeneration at a hyper-accelerated rate. The scar tissue is layered, almost like the rings of a tree. And the energy radiating from him, it's not a single signature, Director. It's 7 distinct, trace-level signatures woven around the dominant, 8th core. They're dormant, almost like echoes, but they're there. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. He'll process this new information, her face a mask of stone. 7 echoes and a core. The story about a power passed to 8 previous users before him suddenly sounded a lot less crazy. Finally, she seemed to come to a decision. The oppressive atmosphere in the room lifted slightly. She dismissed the doctor and sat down opposite Izuku, looking at him now not as a threat, but as a complex and dangerous puzzle. All right, Midoriya. For the sake of argument, let's say I believe you. Every word. That makes you a refugee, stranded in a world you don't understand, with a power we can't classify. Which brings us to our real problem, the law. She gestured, and a large monitor shimmered into existence on the previously blank wall. It showed news footage. A city street in Lagos, a building on fire, a sprawling, futuristic city in Eastern Europe being lifted into the sky. A building collapsing in Vienna. The brutal, devastating aftermath of superhuman conflict. "This is our world," Hill said, her voice grim. "We've had our share of heroes. We called them the Avengers. They saved the world. A few times. But they operated without oversight, without accountability, and people died. Collateral damage. Mistakes were made. After the Battle of Sokovia," she nodded at the image of the floating city, "the nations of the world had enough. They drafted the Sokovia Accords." The screen changed, displaying a dense legal document. Hill summarized. "It's an international law. All enhanced individuals must register with the United Nations. They must disclose their identities and their abilities. They are forbidden from taking action in any country without the express consent of that country's government and a UN panel. They are, for all intents and purposes, assets to be deployed, not independent agents." Izuku stared at the screen, a growing sense of horror dawning on him. You're saying heroes aren't allowed to help people on their own?" "I'm saying power unchecked breeds catastrophe," Hill countered, her tone sharp. "The Accords were meant to provide that check. But our heroes couldn't agree. Tony Stark, Iron Man, saw the necessity of oversight. Steve Rogers, Captain America, saw it as a betrayal of personal freedom. The Avengers chose sides. They fought each other. They broke apart." Izuku felt sick. The very idea was anathema to him. All Might had taught him that the essence of being a hero was the selfless, instinctual drive to save others, to see a person in need and to act, regardless of the rules. To be a symbol that people could rely on, not a weapon that a government committee could deploy. That's wrong," he said, his voice trembling with a passion he couldn't suppress. "A hero's job is to save everyone they can. It's not about choosing sides in a political dispute or waiting for permission. If someone is in trouble, you save them. That's the first rule. It's the only rule that matters." His words hung in the air, filled with a raw, naive idealism that Hill hadn't encountered in a very long time. She saw the conviction in his eyes, the absolute, unshakable belief in his own moral code. He wasn't posturing. He truly believed it. She sighed, a sound heavy with the weariness of 1,000 compromises. "That's a nice sentiment, kid. But down here on this earth, ideals get people killed. You operated in New York today without a license, without registration, without authorization. You're powerful, undocumented, and by the letter of the law, a criminal. But I saved them." Izuku protested, standing up. "Those people were going to be hurt. And what happens next time?" Hill shot back, her voice rising for the first time. "When it's not a couple of muggers, but a creature from another dimension? Or a rogue AI? What happens when your smash brings down a building full of civilians? Who is held accountable? You? Or the government that let an unknown quantity run wild on their streets?" She had him. He had no answer for that. The questions of accountability and collateral damage were ones his own society was still grappling with. He sank back into his chair, the full, crushing weight of his situation finally hitting him. He was alone, powerless in a legal sense, and his very instincts made him a lawbreaker in this strange, complicated world. Hill let the silence stretch before speaking again, her tone returning to its professional calm. "We can't hold you. You haven't technically broken any laws that carry prison time for a first offense. And we can't send you back, because we have no idea how. But we can't just let you go." She slid a small, metallic disc across the table. It was no bigger than a coin. "This is a subdermal tracker. Non-invasive. It will also function as a basic communication device. You will allow our medical staff to implant it at the base of your neck. It is not negotiable. With it, we grant you a provisional, probationary release. You are to avoid any and all heroics. You find a place to live, you keep your head down, and you do not use your powers. If that energy signature of yours spikes again for any reason, a shield recovery team will be on you in less than a minute. Are we clear?" Izuku looked at the disc. It was a leash. A high-tech ball and chain. But it was also a way out of this white room. He nodded numbly. Clear. An hour later, Izuku stood on a street corner in Jersey City, just across the river from the glittering, alien skyline of Manhattan. Shield had driven him here in another black van and dropped him off with nothing but the tattered clothes on his back and $100 in cash. A relocation stipend, the agent had called it. He could feel the faint, itching sensation of the tracker under his skin. He was free, but he had never felt more trapped. The city was overwhelming. The smell of street food, the sound of a dozen different languages, the sheer press of humanity, it was too much. He was a ghost, invisible and adrift. He had no ID, no phone, no family. The $100 wouldn't last a day in a place this expensive. For the first time in his life, the boy who had dreamed of nothing but saving others had no idea how to even save himself. He found a bench in a small park and sat down, burying his face in his hands, the despair he'd been holding back finally threatening to consume him. Figured I might find you here. The voice was familiar. He looked up to see Kamala Khan standing in front of him, holding 2 paper cups of what smelled like hot chocolate. She offered one to him, her expression a mixture of concern and relief. Shield let you go? She asked, sitting down beside him. I hung around for a while, but they're kind of intimidating. I followed the van. Hope that's not creepy. Izuku took the cup, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. Thank you, he murmured. They did. On probation. They told me not to be a hero, Kamala snorted. Yeah, they would. The accords made everything complicated. She took a sip of her cocoa. So, that whole lost thing I mentioned earlier. I'm guessing I was right? He looked at her, at the genuine kindness in her eyes, and he made a split-second decision. He couldn't tell her everything, not the specifics of One for All, but he had to tell someone the truth. He gave her the condensed version, leaving out the secret of his quirk's nature but confirming her suspicions about being from another dimension. She listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to sympathy. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. Wow, she said softly. That's a lot. I'm so sorry, Izuku. You're completely alone here. He just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. No, Kamala said, her voice suddenly firm. She nudged his shoulder. No, you're not. Look, I know we just met, but I saw what you did back there. You didn't hesitate. You just acted. That's what matters. You're a good person. She stood up, a determined glint in her eye. You can't stay out here. My parents, they're pretty cool. We have a spare room. I'll tell them you're a foreign exchange student from Japan whose paperwork got lost in transit and your host family bailed. They'll buy it. They have big hearts. Izuku stared at her, stunned by the sheer generosity of her offer. I couldn't. I can't impose on your family. It's not imposing, it's helping, she insisted. That's what people are supposed to do, right? Come on. My dad's making biryani tonight. You don't want to miss it. She offered him her hand. After a moment's hesitation, he took it. Her grip was warm and strong. For the first time since he'd arrived in this strange, unfamiliar world, he felt a flicker of hope. The Khan household was a vibrant, welcoming oasis of normalcy. It was filled with the rich, aromatic smells of spices, the sound of Bollywood music playing softly from a radio, and the warm, slightly chaotic energy of a loving family. Kamala's parents, Yusuf and Aisha, were just as kind as she had described. They accepted her slightly flimsy story with concerned expressions and open arms, immediately fussing over Izuku's thin frame and tattered clothes, insisting he eat and rest. Later that evening, clean, fed, and dressed in a set of clothes borrowed from Kamala's older brother, Izuku sat in the living room with Kamala, watching the news. It was a local broadcast, detailing city events, politics, and crime. He was trying to absorb as much information about this new world as he could. Then, a specific segment caught his attention. Another daring robbery last night, the news anchor was saying, the third this month, targeting a high-tech laboratory. Sources say the thieves made off with several $1 million worth of advanced cybernetic components and experimental biotech. As with the previous incidents, the perpetrators were in and out in under 2 minutes, leaving behind no witnesses and no usable forensic evidence. Police are describing the thieves as ghosts. The screen showed security footage from one of the labs. It was grainy and distorted, but it showed a figure moving with impossible speed, phasing through a solid wall to bypass the security system. Izuku sat bolt upright, his exhaustion forgotten. His mind, the analytical engine that had filled 14 notebooks, kicked into high gear. No witnesses, he started muttering, the words tumbling out of him. No evidence. Phasing ability suggests a specific power set. High speed indicates enhanced physicals or tech-based assistance. Targeting cybernetics and biotech. Why? Not for money. Those components are too specialized, hard to sell on the black market. They're building something. Or repairing something. 3 labs in a month. There has to be a pattern. Location, type of tech, security level. If I could get the data from the first 2 robberies, I could probably predict the next target. Kamala watched him, a slow smile spreading across her face. He had been quiet and withdrawn all evening, the weight of his displacement pressing down on him. But now, faced with a puzzle, with a problem that needed solving, the hero inside him had woken up. The light was back in his eyes. S.H.I.E.L.D. had told him not to be a hero. They had put a leash on him and ordered him to stand down. But as Izuku Midoriya stared intently at the television, his mind racing, he knew that wasn't possible. It wasn't a choice he could make. A world without a hero license was a challenge, not a sentence. And wherever there were people in trouble, wherever there were ghosts in the machine, his work was not yet done. The Khan family's living room was an island of comforting normalcy in the churning ocean of Izuku Midoriya's new reality. The scent of cardamom and cumin still clung to the air, a warm, spicy ghost of the wonderful dinner he'd been so generously given. On the television, a late-night talk show host was making jokes that he didn't quite understand, the studio audience roaring with laughter. It was peaceful. Domestic. Everything his life in Japan had ceased to be. But Izuku's mind was 1,000 miles away, back in that grainy security footage. A figure phasing through solid matter. A ghost in the machine. Kamala-san, he said, his voice low and intense, cutting through the canned laughter from the TV. Do you have a notebook? And a pen? Kamala, who had been scrolling through her phone on the other end of the couch, looked up. She saw the look in his eyes. The same hyper-focused, analytical gleam he'd had just before he moved faster than she could see. This wasn't the lost, overwhelmed boy she'd found on the park bench. This was the hero. Yeah? Totally. She bounced up, disappearing into her room for a moment before returning with a spiral-bound notebook and a handful of multicolored gel pens. Will these work? Izuku took them with a reverence usually reserved for sacred artifacts. They're perfect. Thank you. He immediately clicked open a green pen and began to write, his hand a blur across the page. The muttering started, soft at first, then gaining in volume and speed as his thoughts began to race. Okay, so 3 robberies, all high-tech labs. The news report called the thief a ghost, which aligns with the phasing ability seen in the video. A phasing quirk, no power, is incredibly rare and versatile, but it must have limitations. Energy consumption is the most likely. Maintaining a quantum destabilized state would require a massive power source, or it would put an incredible strain on the user's body, maybe both. This would explain the targets, not just random tech, but components related to energy regulation and biological stabilization. Kamala watched, fascinated. It was like watching a master strategist plan a war. He wasn't just looking at a crime. He was dissecting an opponent he hadn't even met yet. What are you thinking? She asked, leaning over the back of the couch to look at his rapidly filling page. I'm looking for a pattern, he explained, not breaking his rhythm. The news said they left no forensic evidence. That's because it's impossible to leave fingerprints on something you phase through. The targets are key. What were the first 2 labs they hit? I don't know, it was just a quick news blurb, Kamala said. But I might be able to find out. She pulled her laptop from her backpack and settled onto the floor. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with a practiced ease. Okay, so official police reports are sealed, obviously, but everything leaks online if you know where to look. There are tech security forums where people from these companies complain about Well, everything. Let's see, robbery, advanced tech, New York/New Jersey area. For the next 2 hours, they worked in a strange, synergistic harmony. Kamala navigated the digital world, pulling up news snippets, forum posts, and corporate press releases, feeding him information. Izuku was the analyst, the grand strategist, taking each new piece of data and slotting it into the complex puzzle he was building in the notebook. First robbery was at a lab in Queens called Roxxon Cybernetics Division 7, Kamala announced. They stole a prototype biometric regulator, designed to sync organic tissue with cybernetic implants. Izuku's pen scratched furiously. Biometric regulator. Okay, that fits the biological strain theory. What was the second? Van Klein Industries in Newark, she replied, scrolling through a page of technical jargon. They lost a portable cryostabilization unit and 3 quantum tunneling relays. The relays are the interesting part. They're experimental tech used to create stable micro-wormholes for data transfer. Or, Izuku muttered, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. They could be modified to help stabilize a person who is uncontrollably shifting between dimensions or states of matter. It all fits. The thief isn't stealing for profit. They're desperate. They're collecting components to build or repair a containment suit, or some kind of stabilizing device. They're a patient, not a professional criminal. He stood up and began pacing the small living room, the notebook clutched in his hand. This changes the entire profile. A professional would hit the biggest targets, Stark Industries, Hammer Tech, big risk, big reward. But our ghost is avoiding them. Roxxon Division 7 isn't their main lab. Van Klein is a mid-level corporation. These are softer targets, less security, less chance of running into, the big guys. So they're smart, Kamala added. Going after the low-hanging fruit. Exactly. Izuku's face lit up. Which means we can predict their next target. They aren't looking for the most advanced tech on the market. They're looking for the most compatible and accessible tech. They need one more key component, something to tie the regulator and the relays together. A power source. But not a huge one like an arc reactor. Something smaller, more refined, something that can manage the delicate energy flow between organic and quantum systems. He grabbed Kamala's laptop, startling her slightly, and began typing keywords into the search engine with clumsy, two-fingered pecks. Quantum power converter, bioenergy interface, neurokinetic generator. A name popped up in a sea of academic papers and grant proposals. Dr. Eris Thorne. Kamala leaned in, reading over his shoulder. Thorne. I've heard of him. He's one of those super geniuses who never got famous. Does theoretical work on quantum energy applications. Lost his funding from the university last year, so he runs a private lab now. Total shoestring budget. Izuku's eyes locked onto hers, a fire burning in them. A brilliant but overlooked scientist. A private lab with minimal security, working on the exact kind of specialized power converter that would complete the set. Kamala-san, that's the next target. A quick search confirmed it. Thorne's lab, Quantum Solutions, was located in a repurposed warehouse district in Jersey City, not 10 miles from where they were sitting. We have to warn him, Kamala said, already reaching for her jacket. And call the police. The police will be too slow, Izuku countered, his voice firm. The ghost moves too fast. By the time they set up a perimeter, the lab will be empty, and S.H.I.E.L.D. He touched the back of his neck, where the tracker was a constant, itching reminder of his probation. If I get involved and my power spikes, Hill's team will be here in a minute. They won't try to help the ghosts. They'll just try to capture them. That could make things worse, especially if they're unstable. He looked at Kamala, his expression deadly serious. We have to go ourselves. We can get there, warned Dr. Thorne, and if the ghost shows up, I'll try to talk to them. I'll handle it. He wouldn't fight unless he had to. He would de-escalate. It was the only way to help without triggering his shield leash. Kamala hesitated for only a second. The rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. But the heroic part, the part of her that idolized Captain Marvel and spent her nights protecting Jersey City, was already on board. She saw the conviction in Izuku's face. He wasn't asking her to fight. He was asking her to help him save someone. Okay, she said with a determined nod. Let's go be heroic. The warehouse district was a ghost town under the sickly orange glow of the sodium streetlights. Corrugated steel walls were covered in faded graffiti, and the wind whistled through broken windows, carrying the scent of the nearby river and old rust. Thorne's lab was an anonymous brick building, the only sign of its purpose being a small, unassuming plaque next to the reinforced steel door that read, Quantum Solutions. A single light burned in a second-story window. He's still here, Izuku whispered. They were perched on the roof of an adjacent building, giving them a clear vantage point. The night air was cool, and Izuku, still in borrowed civilian clothes, shivered slightly. He missed the warmth and security of his hero costume. What's the plan? Kamala asked, pulling on the simple domino mask she used for her own patrols. Her own costume was hidden under her clothes, ready to be deployed in an instant. We watch, Izuku said, his eyes scanning every shadow, every alleyway. The ghost will likely phase through a wall to avoid the door and window sensors. We wait for their approach, then we move in to intercept before they can get to the lab itself. The key is to avoid a direct confrontation if possible. They settled in for a stakeout. For over an hour, the only movement was the skittering of unseen things in the darkness, and the slow drift of clouds across the moon. Izuku fought to stay alert, the exhaustion of the last 24 hours weighing on him like a physical cloak. He thought of his friends of Yue, of the war. Was it over? Did they win? The uncertainty was a constant, gnawing pain. Suddenly danger sense, the fourth user's quirk, a silent hum in the back of his skull, prickled to life. It wasn't the sharp, stabbing pain of an imminent attack, but a strange, cold tingling, like a drop of ice water on his brain. It was a warning of a subtle, creeping threat. They're here, he breathed. Where? Kamala whispered, her eyes wide as she scanned the street below. I don't see anything. Neither do I, Izuku admitted, his gaze sweeping the area. But I can feel it. Then, the streetlights in a 50-foot radius around Thorne's lab flickered violently. They buzzed, dimmed, and then died, plunging the immediate area into a deeper, more profound darkness. An EMP effect, Izuku muttered. A side effect of the phasing. They're close. A flicker of movement in the alley across from the lab caught his eye. It wasn't a person, just a distortion, like a heat haze on a cold night. The air shimmered, and a figure seemed to coalesce out of the shadows. The ghost was tall and slender, clad in a white and gray containment suit that looked both advanced and jury-rigged. Wires and glowing conduits snaked across its surface, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. The helmet was opaque, hiding any features, giving the figure an unnerving, inhuman quality. They didn't walk, they glided across the pavement, their feet seeming to not quite touch the ground. Without a word, the figure moved towards the lab's brick wall. They didn't slow down. As they reached the wall, their body dissolved into a translucent, shimmering state, passing through the solid brick and mortar as if it were smoke. Now! Izuku commanded. He pushed off the rooftop, landing silently on the pavement below in a crouch. He kept one for all dormant for now, not wanting to trigger the shield tracker. Kamala was right behind him, her body stretching and contorting as she dropped, absorbing the impact with a faint, rubbery sound. They raced to the door. It was locked with a heavy-duty maglock. Izuku didn't hesitate. He focused a tiny, precise sliver of one for all, less than 1%, into his index finger and jabbed the electronic lock's control panel. There was a fizz, a pop, and a shower of sparks. The heavy lock clicked open. They slipped inside. The lab was a single, cavernous room, cluttered with workbenches, complex machinery, and holographic displays that were currently flickering erratically due to the ghost's passive energy field. On a raised platform in the center of the room was a large, spherical device suspended in a magnetic field, Thorne's quantum converter, and standing before it was the ghost. In the corner of the room, a man in a lab coat, presumably Dr. Thorne, was backed against the wall, his face pale with terror. Stay back! The ghost's voice echoed, distorted and digitized by their helmet. It was a female voice, young and strained with pain. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just need the converter. Okay, let's all just take a deep breath. Kamala said, holding her hands up in a placating gesture. We're not here to fight. You shouldn't have come. The ghost replied, her form starting to flicker and glitch, becoming momentarily transparent. A wave of cold washed through the room. Izuku took a cautious step forward. We know what you're doing, he said, his voice calm and steady. You're not a thief. You're trying to fix your suit. You're trying to heal yourself. The ghost froze. The helmet tilted slightly, a gesture of pure shock. How? How could you know that? I analyzed the technology you stole, Izuku explained. The pattern was clear. Your power, it's unstable, isn't it? It hurts you. For a moment, it seemed like he was getting through. Then, the ghost's body convulsed violently. Her form flickered rapidly, and she cried out, the sound a mixture of pain and electronic static. I can't control it. I need the converter. Now! She lunged not at them, but at the device. Izuku reacted on pure instinct. He activated full cowling at a low 5%, a soft green aura enveloping him. He didn't dare use more. He shot forward, intending to intercept her, to block her path. But his outstretched arm passed right through her shimmering body. It felt like plunging his hand into freezing, electrified mist. The biofeedback was jarring, sending a painful jolt up his arm. The ghost ignored him, her intangible hand reaching for the converter. Kamala acted next. Get away from that thing! She yelled, her right arm elongating and expanding until her hand was the size of a small car. She swung the massive fist not to hit the ghost, but to shove the entire magnetic containment unit aside. It was a good plan, but the ghost was too fast. She phased her entire body through Kamala's giant hand and solidified just long enough to wrap her fingers around the converter. She ripped it from its housing with a shower of sparks and a screech of tearing metal. Alarms blared to life, shrill and piercing. Stop! Izuku shouted, repositioning himself between the ghost and the exit. That thing is experimental. You don't know if it will even work. It could make your condition worse. I don't have a choice. The ghost screamed back, her voice cracking with desperation. She clutched the converter to her chest and charged. The fight, if it could be called that, was one of the most frustrating experiences of Izuku's life. Every attack was useless. A swift kick passed through her leg. A targeted flick of a Delaware smash only ruffled her suit as the air pressure harmlessly passed through her intangible form. He was trying to fight a literal phantom. Kamala tried to pin her down, stretching her torso to wrap around the ghost like a snake, but it was like trying to catch smoke in a net. All the while, Izuku's analytical mind was working, overriding his frustration. He wasn't just watching the ghost, he was studying her. He noticed the flickers, the glitches in her phasing. They weren't random. They happened when she was under stress, or when she had to exert herself, like when she ripped the converter free. To interact with the physical world, she had to become at least partially solid for a microsecond. He also saw the toll it was taking. Her movements were becoming more erratic. After she phased through one of Kamala's attacks, she stumbled, her body becoming solid for a full second as she gasped for breath, her hand flying to her helmet. The conduits on her suit flickered and died before reigniting. She was running out of energy. The pain was overwhelming her. He saw it then. The pained gasp, the uncontrolled power, the desperation to make it stop. It struck him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't looking at a villain anymore. He was looking at Eri. He remembered the little girl with the horn, her body racked by a quirk so powerful it was tearing her apart from the inside. He remembered her terrified eyes, her belief that she was cursed, that her very existence only caused pain. This ghost, whoever she was trapped in the same kind of personal hell. And Izuku knew, with an absolute certainty that settled deep in his soul, that you don't save people like that by punching them. Kamala, stop! He yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos of the alarms. Kamala, who had been about to try and ensnare the ghost's legs, froze in surprise. Izuku dropped his fighting stance. He stood straight, his hands open at his sides in a gesture of non-aggression. The green lightning of full cowling faded, leaving him standing there in his borrowed clothes, looking impossibly young and vulnerable. The ghost faltered, her charge slowing to a halt. She stood 20 feet away, the stolen converter held like a shield, her helmet fixed on him. I'm not going to fight you anymore, Izuku said, his voice ringing with a sincerity that was impossible to fake. I can see that you're in pain. I can see this power, is hurting you. The ghost's posture remained tense, defensive. You don't know anything about me. I know what it looks like when someone is being torn apart by their own ability, he replied, his voice softening. I met a little girl once. Her name was Eri. Her quirk was a powerful rewinding ability, but she couldn't control it. It would activate, and it would hurt people. It hurt her. Everyone saw her as a monster, a weapon to be used. But she wasn't. She was just a scared kid who needed someone to tell her that it wasn't her fault. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. The ghost flinched but didn't run. I can see you're scared, too, Izuku continued, his heart aching with empathy. You're stealing this equipment because you think it's the only way to save yourself. Maybe it is. But maybe it's not. That converter is unstable. It could overload your suit and... I don't know what it would do. But it's a risk. You don't have to take it alone. He took another step. He was 10 feet away now. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm a hero. And a hero's job is to save people. That includes people who are hurting so much they think they're beyond saving. It includes you. He looked directly at her opaque helmet, trying to project his feelings through his gaze. Please. Let us help you. We can find another way. A safer way. You don't have to be a ghost. You can be a person again. Silence. The only sound was the incessant wail of the alarms. The ghost's shoulders began to shake. A choked, digitized sob came through her helmet's speaker. The converter slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the concrete floor. Her body convulsed, flickering violently between solid and intangible states. The lights in the lab strobed in time with her phasing. I can't. She gasped, her form becoming almost completely transparent. It's falling apart. She collapsed, her body falling through the floor up to her waist before solidifying with a sickening crunch. She screamed, a raw, unfiltered cry of agony this time, the helmet's modulator failing. Izuku rushed forward, but hesitated, unsure if he could even touch her. What's happening? Kamala cried, rushing to his side. Her suit must have failed. The instability is taking over, Izuku said, his mind racing. We have to stabilize her. Just then, the ghost head snapped up. Her helmet turned towards the darkened doorway of the lab, a new kind of terror in her posture. No. She whimpered, the digitized voice barely a whisper. He found me. Izuku's danger sense erupted. It wasn't the cold tingle from before. This was a piercing, white-hot spike of pain right behind his eyes. It was a scream that meant one thing, predator. A figure stepped out of the shadows at the entrance of the lab. He was tall, clad in tactical armor, with a white cowl and a skull-like mask. A circular shield was strapped to his back, a sword hung at his hip, and a bow was slung over his shoulder. He moved with an eerie, liquid grace, an absolute confidence that spoke of 1,000 battles won. He clapped his hands together slowly, the sound a mocking counterpoint to the wailing alarms. What a touching little scene, the figure said, his voice a calm, metallic baritone filtered through his mask. The runaway asset, and the two little heroes trying to save her. Cute. He looked directly at Izuku, his head tilting in an unnervingly analytical way. You. The green one. I saw your move on the news. That little air flick. Impressive control. I think I'll add that to my repertoire. In a motion too fast to properly track, he flicked his middle finger in exactly the same way Izuku had. A compressed pellet of air shot across the room and shattered a beaker on a nearby table. He had copied the move perfectly after seeing it just once. The ghost, still trapped halfway in the floor, looked at the newcomer with pure dread. Taskmaster. Taskmaster ignored her, his skull-like gaze fixed on Izuku and Kamala. I've been hired to retrieve the asset. She's damaged goods, but her abilities are still valuable. I'll be taking her, and the converter she was so kind to fetch for me. He drew his sword, the polished steel gleaming in the strobing alarm lights. Now, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, almost pleasant tone. Are you going to give them to me? Or do I have to teach you two a lesson? The arrival of Taskmaster transformed the chaotic laboratory into a pressure cooker. The air, already thick with the scent of ozone and the shrill cry of alarms, now crackled with a palpable, predatory intent. He stood in the doorway, a silhouette of deadly potential against the strobing red emergency lights, his skull mask an unnerving, emotionless focal point in the room. Izuku's mind, which had been focused entirely on empathy and de-escalation, slammed back into combat analysis mode. Danger sense was no longer a subtle tingle. It was a screaming siren in his head, a primal warning that every cell in his body was in the presence of an apex predator. He instantly categorized the threat: high-level combatant, mimicry-based power set, multiple weapon masteries, tactically proficient. This wasn't a desperate person in pain like the ghost. This was a professional. A killer. Get Dr. Thorne out of here, Izuku said to Kamala, his voice low and urgent, never taking his eyes off Taskmaster. And stay with the ghost. Her name is Ava. Protect her. Kamala, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance, nodded. What are you going to do? I'm going to buy you time, he replied. Taskmaster let out a low chuckle, the sound distorted by his modulator. Buy time? Kid, you're looking at a man who can perfectly replicate the fighting style of Captain America after watching him for 5 minutes. You're not buying time. You're just choosing how you want to be taken apart. He took a step forward, his movements fluid and unnervingly relaxed. I've been tracking my runaway asset Ava Star for weeks. She's a good little ghost, hard to pin down, but her quantum signature leaves a trail, like breadcrumbs. A messy one, but a trail nonetheless. I knew she'd come here for the converter. I just didn't expect a welcoming committee. Ava, still half-phased into the floor, whimpered, he's not just a contractor. He works for them. They want to turn me into a weapon. Izuku's jaw tightened. This was worse than he thought. It wasn't just about retrieval. It was about exploitation. It was the same darkness he'd fought his entire life, the same predatory evil that All for One embodied, the belief that people with powers were not people, but tools. You're not taking her, Izuku stated, his voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even himself. He settled into a low, ready stance, the familiar posture of shoot style. He kept full cowling dormant, a hidden ace. Using it now would be a mistake. It would alert S.H.I.E.L.D., and more importantly, it would show Taskmaster his primary weapon before he even understood the full scope of his opponent's ability. Brave words, Taskmaster drawled. He unslung the round shield from his back, holding it with a familiarity that was deeply unsettling. The way he planted his feet, the angle of his body, the grip on the shield straps. It was a perfect mirror of every video Izuku had ever seen of Captain America. Let's see if you can back them up. Taskmaster moved. He didn't rush, he flowed. He threw the shield with a flick of his wrist. It wasn't aimed at Izuku, but at a heavy-duty power conduit on the wall. The shield ricocheted with impossible precision, rebounding off a steel support beam and then hurtling directly towards Kamala, who was trying to shield Ava's prone form. Izuku's body reacted before his mind could fully process the geometry of the attack. He exploded forward, a blur of motion. He didn't try to block the shield. That would require a burst of power. Instead, he dove, sliding across the slick concrete floor, intercepting the shield with a powerful kick from his iron sole boots. The impact rattled up his leg, but he successfully deflected its path. The shield spun into the darkness, clattering against the far wall. He sprang back to his feet, but Taskmaster was already there, sword in hand. The villain didn't use wide, powerful swings. He moved with the deadly, efficient grace of a master swordsman, his blade a silver blur. The style was precise, elegant, and utterly lethal. Izuku recognized it from S.H.I.E.L.D.'s historical files on the Avengers. It was the combat style of the Black Knight. Izuku was forced into a desperate defense. He couldn't match the sword with his bare hands. He bobbed and weaved, using his agility to stay just outside the blade's reach. He used Black Whip in short, sharp bursts, not as a weapon, but as a tool. A black tendril would shoot out, wrapping around a pipe on the ceiling, allowing him to swing out of the sword's path. Another would lash out to knock over a workbench, creating a temporary obstacle. Interesting, Taskmaster commented, his voice never rising above a conversational tone as he pressed his attack. Prehensile energy whips. Unpredictable. I'll have to work on the muscle memory for that, he was analyzing. Every move Izuku made, every dodge, every feint, was being recorded and processed behind that skull mask. Izuku was fighting an opponent who was learning how to defeat him in real time. It was like fighting a superpowered, combat-oriented version of himself. While Izuku kept Taskmaster occupied, Kamala had managed to pull a terrified Dr. Thorne to his feet. Go! Get out of here! Call for help! She urged, pushing him towards a rear exit. Thorne, needing no further encouragement, scrambled away into the night. Kamala then turned her attention to Ava. The ghost's condition was worsening. Her body was flickering like a faulty light bulb, and the parts of her that were solid were contorted in pain. Ava! You have to try and pull yourself out, Kamala said, kneeling beside her. Focus! I can't, the suit's power cell is dead, Ava gasped, her voice strained. No energy to maintain cohesion. Suddenly, an arrow whistled through the broken window of the lab and embedded itself in the floor just inches from Taskmaster's foot. It wasn't a normal arrow. The tip sparked, and a thick, incredibly sticky gray foam erupted from it, instantly covering the floor in a rapidly hardening morass. Taskmaster's foot was caught. He grunted in annoyance, yanking his boot free with a wet, tearing sound, but it cost him a precious second of momentum. Party's getting crowded, he muttered, turning his head towards the window. A figure in a purple and black tactical suit dropped silently through the shattered frame, landing in a perfect three-point crouch. She had a high-tech compound bow in her hand and a quiver full of specialized arrows on her back. Her face was set in a look of grim determination, a lock of dark hair falling across her focused eyes. Taskmaster, Kate Bishop said, her voice dripping with contempt. She knocked another arrow in a single, fluid motion. Fancy meeting you here. I've been looking for you. Taskmaster let out an exaggerated sigh. Ah, the junior Hawkeye. Still playing dress-up? I thought your mentor would have taught you not to pick fights you can't win. Clint taught me to put my arrows where they'll do the most good, Kate shot back, her bowstring taut. And right now, that looks like it's right between your creepy, glowing eyes. She loosed the arrow. Taskmaster, with a speed that defied belief, raised his sword and deflected it with a sharp clang of metal on metal. The arrow ricocheted into the ceiling, where it exploded in a brilliant flash of disorienting light, like a magnesium flare. A classic hero misunderstanding was about to unfold, born from the chaos. Kate saw two unknowns, a glowing green kid and a stretchy girl, standing over a downed figure, with a high-value target in the middle of the room. Her immediate, tactically sound assumption was that this was a multi-sided turf war over the ghost asset. She had been tracking Taskmaster for weeks after he'd stolen advanced schematics for her trick arrows from a Bishop Security RD lab. This was her mission, and she wasn't about to let a couple of new capes mess it up. All right, kids, playtime's over, Kate said, her bow now aimed squarely at Izuku. I don't know who you are, but you're in my way. Back off from the ghost. Izuku stared, his mind reeling. Wait, no. We're on the same side. We're trying to help her. Yeah, I've heard that one before, Kate retorted, her eyes narrowed. Usually right before someone tries to put an arrow in my back. Step aside. Taskmaster seized the opportunity created by the infighting. While Kate and Izuku were distracted by each other, he threw a small disc at the ceiling directly above them. The disc popped open, releasing a thick, heavy gas that smelled of ozone and burnt sugar. Knockout gas! Izuku yelled, his hero training kicking in. He immediately held his breath, and used Black Whip to yank Kamala and the half-phased Ava away from the cloud's epicenter. Kate, ever the professional, had a rebreather built into her cowl, which she activated with a flick of a switch. But the gas was a smokescreen, a diversion. Through the swirling fog, Taskmaster made his move. He lunged for the fallen quantum converter. Oh no you don't! Kate snarled. She fired another arrow, this one trailing a thin, high-tensile wire. It was a BOLO arrow. It wrapped around Taskmaster's legs, but with practiced ease, he simply sliced through the wire with his sword and continued his lunge, grabbing the device. Now Izuku had to make a choice. He couldn't fight two opponents at once, especially when one of them was a civilian he was trying to protect. He had to prove to this new archer that they were allies. "Look out!" he shouted. Taskmaster, converter in hand, had thrown his shield again, this time directly at Kate's head. It was a killing blow, thrown with the full force of a super soldier. Kate's eyes widened. She tried to bring her bow up to block, but she wasn't going to be fast enough. Izuku made his decision. He pushed off the floor, activating 8% of one for all in a controlled burst. The green lightning flared around him. He wasn't just fast, he was a verdant comet. He crossed the 20 feet between them in a heartbeat, positioning himself in front of Kate. He didn't try to block the shield with his arms, the force would shatter them. Instead, he channeled the power into his leg. Manchester smash. He brought his leg up in a powerful, axe-kick motion, his iron soul connecting with the edge of the shield. The sound was like a thunderclap inside the cavernous lab. The vibranium shield, a weapon that had absorbed blows from gods, was sent careening wildly off course, embedding itself deep into a solid concrete support pillar. The shockwave from the impact blew the knockout gas away, clearing the air. Silence. Kate Bishop stared, her bow lowered, her jaw slightly agape. She had seen the shield coming. She had accepted, in that split second, that this was going to hurt, possibly a lot. And then, this kid, this glowing, green-haired kid, had moved faster than a bullet and had kicked Captain America's shield across the room. Taskmaster also froze, his head cocked. "Now that is new," he said, a genuine note of surprise in his voice. The raw power output, impressive. Very impressive. He looked from the embedded shield to Izuku, then to the weakened Eva. He weighed his options. He had the prize. He had confirmed the asset's location. A protracted fight against 3 unpredictable opponents, one of whom possessed devastating raw power, was a poor tactical choice. A professional knows when to cut his losses. "Well, this has been a delightful little get-together," Taskmaster said, holding up the quantum converter. "But I have what I came for. Don't worry, kids. I'll be back for the ghost later, once I've had some time to study." He gave a mocking salute, then threw a pellet at the floor. It erupted in a blinding flash of light and a deafening sonic boom. By the time their vision cleared and the ringing in their ears subsided, he was gone. The only evidence he'd been there was the shield embedded in the pillar, and the lingering sense of dread. The alarms finally sputtered and died, plunging the lab into a heavy, ringing silence, broken only by Ava's pained gasps. Kate finally lowered her bow, turning her full attention to Izuku. The green energy had faded from him, but the afterimage of his impossible speed and power remained. "Okay," she said, her voice a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he said, breathing heavily. The 8% burst had been controlled, but it still put a strain on his system. "This is Kamala. We're trying to help her." He gestured to Ava. Kate walked over, her boots crunching on stray bits of broken glass. She looked down at Ava, her expression softening slightly as she took in the girl's desperate state. Then she looked at the converter Taskmaster had stolen. "He took the quantum device. I heard him. He's going to use it. He's going to weaponize it," Izuku corrected grimly. "And he's going to come back for Ava." Kate ran a hand through her hair, the professional archer momentarily replaced by a stressed-out young woman. "Great. Just great. I've been tracking this creep for weeks. He hit one of my family's labs, stole some of my best arrow schematics. Pim particle arrows, sonic dampeners, the works. I was hoping to get them back and put him away. Now he's got a quantum what's-it to play with, too. We need to work together," Izuku said, the statement simple and direct. Kate looked at him, then at Kamala, who was trying to comfort Ava. "I work alone. It's less complicated, is it?" Izuku challenged, his voice gaining strength. "Taskmaster just played us against each other. He used our confusion to get what he wanted. If we had been working together from the start, he would have left with nothing. Working alone didn't help you get your schematics back, and it didn't help us protect Ava." His logic was sound. Annoyingly so. Kate hated it when people were right in a way that made her feel like she'd been dumb. "Look," Izuku continued, his tone softening, becoming more earnest. I don't know the rules of this world very well. I don't know who the good guys and bad guys are supposed to be, but I know that man is a villain. I know he wants to hurt people. And I know that the three of us, right now, are the only ones who can stop him. You have the tracking skills and the experience. Kamala has powers I don't even understand yet. And I. He clenched his fist. I can hit hard. Together, we stand a chance. Alone, he'll pick us apart one by one. He gave her a small, determined smile. He called you the junior Hawkeye. That means you have a mentor. My mentor taught me that the strongest heroes aren't the ones with the most power, but the ones who inspire others to stand with them. He taught me that saving people is a team sport. Kate stared at him. His sincerity was jarring. In the cynical, post-Civil War world of heroes she operated in, that kind of pure, unadulterated idealism was a relic. It was something she heard in Clint's war stories about Captain America, not something she ever expected to see standing in front of her, smelling faintly of ozone and borrowed laundry detergent. It was naive, it was reckless, and it was incredibly compelling. Fine, she sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Fine. We'll work together. For now. On a strictly temporary basis until Taskmaster is dealt with. But I'm in charge of tactics. And you, she pointed at Izuku, need to explain the whole human glow stick, shield-kicking thing. And you, she pointed at Kamala, need to tell me if your arms are always that stretchy. A tentative alliance was forged in the wreckage of the lab, under the crimson glow of the emergency lights. Izuku's impassioned plea, a distillation of everything All Might had ever taught him, had broken through Kate Bishop's cynical armor. Their first act as a proto-team was to deal with Ava. Her condition was critical. Izuku, remembering the shield doctor's scans, realized her suit wasn't just a containment field. It was life support. With its power cell dead, she was in danger of discorporating entirely. We need to get her somewhere safe, Kamala said, her voice laced with worry. And she needs power. A lot of it. Not just any power, Izuku muttered, examining the dead conduits on Ava's suit. It has to be clean, stable. A raw feed would overload the damaged systems. Kate was already on her comms. I have a place, she said, her voice low and professional again. One of my safe houses. It's off S.H.I.E.L.D.'s grid, and it has an independent power supply. We can jury-rig a direct feed from the generator. It's not a permanent solution, but it might keep her stable for a little while. She looked at Izuku. Can you carry her? He nodded. Gently. He activated 3% full cowling, just enough to give him the strength he needed without putting undue stress on his body. He carefully gathered Ava's flickering form into his arms. Touching her was a bizarre sensation, like holding a statue made of television static. She was light, almost weightless, and unnervingly cold. They moved through the darkened city like ghosts themselves. Kate led the way, navigating a labyrinth of rooftops and fire escapes with the practiced ease of a creature born to the urban jungle. Izuku followed, his precious cargo held tight, his movements silent and sure. Kamala brought up the rear, her eyes scanning their back trail, a silent, stretchy guardian. They were a strange, disparate trio, a boy from another world, a girl from Jersey City, and a self-appointed vigilante archer. They were not a team. Not yet. But as they moved through the shadows of the city, united by a common enemy and a shared purpose to protect the broken girl in Izuku's arms, the first, fragile threads of one were beginning to be woven. Kate Bishop's safe house wasn't a grimy, sparsely furnished room in a rundown apartment block. It was a spacious, high-tech loft apartment nestled anonymously in a repurposed pre-war industrial building in the meatpacking district. Exposed brick and polished oak floorboards were juxtaposed with sleek, minimalist furniture and workstations laden with cutting-edge technology. A floor-to-ceiling window, currently polarized to an opaque black, offered a commanding, if unseen, view of the Hudson River. The air smelled of ozone, gun oil, and expensive coffee. They had laid Ava Star on a medical cot in the center of the room. She was barely conscious, her form flickering more erratically now, her pained whimpers the only sound in the otherwise silent loft. Kate, moving with the focused intensity of a field surgeon, had already pried open a panel in the floor, revealing a complex junction box humming with power. It was the hub for the loft's independent generator, a beast of a machine hidden somewhere in the building's sub-basement. Okay, Green Bean, Stretchy, listen up, Kate said, not looking up from the mass of wires and conduits she was sorting through. The nicknames were her way of maintaining a level of ironic detachment, a flimsy shield against the gravity of the situation. This generator can put out enough juice to power a city block for a week, but as you so astutely pointed out, we can't just plug her in. We need to regulate the flow, step it down, and match the frequency of her suit's power core. Izuku was already kneeling beside her, peering into the junction box. His analytical mind, starved for a complex technical problem, immediately began worrying. The conduits on her suit are damaged. A direct power link is risky. We need a buffer. Something to act as a capacitor and a regulator. That holographic interface over there. He pointed to a nearby workstation. It must have a localized power source, something small but stable. Kate glanced over, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Yeah, a kinetic energy converter. It powers the projector. Can we repurpose it? Izuku asked, his muttering habit kicking in. If we can recalibrate its output and use it as an interface between the main generator and her suit's power cell, it might create a stable enough charge to prevent a system overload. We need to bypass the primary safeties and manually create a feedback loop. For the next hour, they worked. It was an impromptu, high-stakes science project. Kate's pragmatic, hands-on engineering skills meshed surprisingly well with Izuku's theoretical genius. She knew the hardware, the tools, the practical limits of the tech. He understood the esoteric physics, the energy dynamics, the why behind the how. Kamala acted as their assistant, her ability to stretch and shrink her fingers allowing her to manipulate tiny wires and components in spaces their normal-sized hands couldn't reach. Finally, it was done. A thick power cable ran from the generator hub to the small, repurposed converter, which was now glowing with a soft blue light. A cluster of finer wires snaked from the converter to a port they had located on the back of Ava's suit. All right, Kate said, wiping a smear of grease from her forehead with the back of her hand. Moment of truth. If this works, the charge should stabilize her phasing. If it doesn't, well, the generator has circuit breakers for a reason. Izuku placed a hand gently on Ava's shoulder. Her form felt insubstantial, like touching a cloud. Ava. Can you hear me? We're going to try and give your suit some power. It might be a shock at first, but you have to try and hold on. A faint, digitized murmur was his only reply. On 3, Kate said, her hand hovering over a touchpad that controlled the power flow. 1, 2, 3. She tapped the screen. Power surged through the cables. The kinetic converter whined, its blue glow intensifying. The conduits on Ava's suit, which had been dark, flickered to life, glowing with the same pale blue light. Her body convulsed once, a violent shudder that shook the cot. Her flickering form stabilized, the glitches and transparencies ceasing. For the first time since they'd met her, she was completely, solidly there. With a final, shuddering gasp, she fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Her breathing, though shallow, was even and regular. A collective sigh of relief washed through the room. They had done it. Kamala collapsed onto a nearby sofa, her lanky limbs sprawling across the cushions. Okay. So. Giant fists and phasing those are one thing. Hot wiring a quantum life support suit is officially the weirdest thing I've done all week. And I once had to fight a giant, genetically engineered sewer crocodile. His name was Bartholomew. Izuku managed a tired smile. The immediate crisis was over. But the larger one, Taskmaster, still loomed. He looked around the loft, at this small, strange group of people he was now inextricably linked with. An archer with trust issues, a girl who could punch like a runaway train, a quantum ghost, and him, a boy from another dimension. They were a collection of loose parts, a team by circumstance only. That had to change. We need a name, he said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. Kate, who was monitoring Ava's vitals on a screen, snorted. A name? We're not a band. We're a temporary, goal-oriented task force. No, Izuku insisted, his voice gaining that familiar, earnest intensity. Taskmaster saw us as 3 separate problems. That's why he won. We need to be one. A name gives us an identity. It's a symbol. It's what we fight for. Kamala sat up, intrigued. A name, like the Avengers? Or the X-Men? That's so cool. What about the Justice Crew? The Awesome Avengers? The Awesome Avengers is already a thing, Kamala. And it's trademarked, Kate said dryly, without looking away from her screen. Besides, we're not them. The Avengers, they're gods and super soldiers. They operate on a global scale. We're a little more street level. Exactly, Izuku said, seizing the point. They are the established heroes. They defend the world from the front lines. But what about the people who fall through the cracks? People like Ava? Someone needs to be there for them. To lead the way, to be the first line of defense for the forgotten. He thought of All Might, blazing a path for a new generation. He thought of his own class, 1A, always pushing forward, striving to be the next wave of heroes. We should be the ones who go first, he said, his voice resonating with conviction. The ones who stand at the forefront. A vanguard, the word hung in the air. Vanguard. It had weight. It spoke of purpose, of leadership, of being on the cutting edge. Kamala's eyes lit up. The vanguard. I like it. It sounds important. Official. Kate was silent for a long moment. She finally turned away from her monitors, leaning back against the console and crossing her arms. She looked at Izuku, at the raw, unfiltered idealism burning in his eyes. It was still so foreign to her, so pure. But the name resonated with a part of her she usually kept buried, the part that had picked up a bow in the first place, inspired by a hero who stood with gods and monsters, armed with nothing but sticks and string. The vanguard, she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. It didn't sound as cheesy as she'd expected. Fine. Whatever. We can call ourselves the Sparkly Friendship Brigade for all I care, as long as we have a plan to take down Taskmaster. The name stuck. A small but significant step had been taken. They weren't just a random assortment of powered individuals anymore. They were the vanguard. A plan is exactly what we need, Izuku said, his focus shifting back to the mission. And a plan requires training. We don't know how to fight together. We need to build synergy, and so, their training began. Kate's loft, with its advanced systems and spacious layout, became their impromptu training ground. The next 48 hours were an intense, exhausting, and surprisingly effective crash course in teamwork. Kate, stepping naturally into the role of tactical lead and drill instructor, was relentless. All right, Green Bean. She barked on the first morning, standing at one end of the loft's open living space, bow in hand. You said you have some kind of danger sense, right? Let's see it. Before Izuku could answer, she loosed an arrow. It wasn't one of her lethal trick arrows, but a blunt-tipped practice shaft. It flew with blinding speed, aimed directly at his center mass. Izuku's danger sense flared. He didn't have time to think, only to react. He dropped, the arrow whistling over his head and thudding into the padded wall behind him. Too slow, Kate critiqued. You dodged, but it was a full-body movement. Inefficient. A real fight doesn't give you that much room. You need to learn to dodge with minimal motion. Make yourself a smaller target. Another arrow. This time, Izuku was ready. He twisted at the waist, the arrow streaking past his side, ruffling his shirt. Better, Kate allowed. Again. For hours, she peppered him with arrows from all angles, forcing him to refine his reflexes, to trust the prickling sensation in his skull, to move with an economy of motion he'd never been forced to learn before. He learned to distinguish the intensity of the tingle, a slight buzz for a peripheral threat, a sharp sting for a direct one. It was grueling, but by the end of it, he felt more in tune with the fourth user's quirk than ever before. Next was Kamala. Stretchy, Kate said, pointing to a series of holographic targets that had materialized around the room. Your power is incredible, but it's unfocused. You throw these giant, slow punches. A faster opponent can run circles around you. You need to use your environment. Use your elasticity for positioning, not just for hitting. She put Kamala through a series of complex spatial awareness drills. Kamala had to navigate an obstacle course of laser grids by elongating her limbs, contorting her torso, and using her shape-shifting abilities to anchor herself to walls and ceilings. At first, she was clumsy, a tangle of limbs. But with Kate's sharp, direct coaching, she started to get the hang of it, moving with a newfound, bizarre grace, like a super-powered ballerina made of rubber. But the most crucial training was the development of their combo moves. "Ava," Izuku said gently, approaching the cot where the ghost was now sitting up, sipping a nutrient broth Kamala had prepared. Her suit was stable, glowing with a healthy blue light, but she was still weak, her face pale and drawn. "I know you're still recovering, but we need your help. We need to understand your powers." Ava, whose name they had learned was short for Ava Star, was hesitant. Years of being a fugitive, of being hunted and treated like a weapon, had made her deeply distrustful. But Izuku's genuine empathy, his story about Eri, had forged a small, fragile bond. "It's not a power," she said, her voice soft and raspy, free of the digital distortion for the first time. "It's a disease. A quantum imbalance. My father was a shield scientist. There was an accident with a quantum tunnel. It tore my molecular structure apart. I'm constantly phasing in and out of reality. This suit, it helps anchor me. But it's failing." "Taskmaster wants to use your disease as a weapon," Izuku said. "To do that, he'd need a way to control it. To direct your phasing. That means he thinks it can be controlled." He had an idea, a wild, dangerous theory based on his observations during their fight. "When I use Black Whip in the lab, my tendrils are made of solidified energy. They're not exactly solid, not exactly energy. What if they could provide you with a temporary anchor?" They tested the theory cautiously. Izuku manifested a single, thin tendril of Black Whip, its dark energy crackling in the air. "Try to phase through it," he urged. Ava looked terrified, but she trusted him. She closed her eyes and concentrated. Her hand became translucent and passed through the energy tendril. But something was different. "I can feel it," she whispered, her eyes snapping open in shock. "It's not solid. But it's there. It's like a line in the fog." This was the breakthrough. Over the next day, they practiced. Izuku would use Black Whip to create a stable monofilament line through a space. Ava, in her intangible state, could feel this line and use it as a guide, allowing her to move with impossible precision while phased. It was their first true combination maneuver. He could create a path, and she could walk it, becoming a guided, unstoppable phantom. While the team trained their bodies, Izuku trained their minds. He commandeered a large whiteboard, and with his multicolored pens, he began to do what he did best: analyze. "Taskmaster's greatest strength is also his greatest weakness," he explained, sketching a diagram of the villain's skull mask. "His photographic reflexes allow him to copy any physical action he sees. He has Captain America's shield work, Hawkeye's archery, Black Panther's martial arts, Black Widow's espionage skills. He's an army of one. Trying to beat him at his own game is impossible." He drew a circle around the sketch of Taskmaster. "So we don't play his game. We play ours." He began to draw lines radiating from the circle, connecting to sketches of each of them. "Kate," he said, looking at the archer. "He's copied your mentor. He knows every trick Hawkeye knows. So you can't use Clint Barton's playbook. You have to be unpredictable. Use ricochets he can't anticipate. Use arrow combinations he's never seen before. You're not your mentor. You're you. That's your advantage." Kate nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. He was right. She'd been trying to live up to Clint's legacy. Maybe it was time to build her own. "Kamala," he continued, turning to her. "Your power is unique. He's never seen anything like it. He can copy a punch or a kick, but he can't copy your elasticity. He can't copy you turning your hand into a shield the size of a door. Your unpredictability is our wild card. We need you to be a constant, chaotic variable that he can't model." Kamala grinned, puffing out her chest. "Chaotic variable. I can do that, Ava." Izuku's voice softened. "You are the key. He sees you as an asset to be captured. He knows how you fight when you're desperate and alone. He doesn't know how you fight as part of a team. He can't copy phasing. He can't predict where you'll be if I'm guiding you with Black Whip. You're our ghost in his machine. Finally, he looked at his own section of the board. And me. He's seen my basic movements. He's copied my Delaware smash flick. He saw my 8% kick. He thinks he knows my power level. He doesn't. I've been holding back, trying not to alert Shield. In a real fight, I can go higher. I can be faster and stronger than anything he's recorded. That will be our finishing move. It was a solid plan. It was a brilliant plan. They had a name, they had a strategy, and they had synergy. They were ready. They were the vanguard, and they were about to get their teeth kicked in. Kate's tracking skills, augmented by some of Kamala's online sleuthing, led them to Taskmaster's suspected base of operations, a decommissioned Roxxon shipping depot on the industrial outskirts of Staten Island. It was the perfect hideout, isolated, fortified, and full of heavy machinery that would mask any unusual energy signatures. Their first mission as the Vanguard was a stealth infiltration. The goal was to retrieve Kate's schematics and the quantum converter, and to put Taskmaster on ice. They moved in at dusk, using the long shadows of the shipping containers as cover. Their entry was flawless. Kate used an acid-tipped arrow to silently dissolve the lock on a maintenance hatch. Ava phased through the main wall to do a quick reconnaissance, reporting back the number of guards and their patrol routes. They were a well-oiled machine. They bypassed the human guards with ease, using a combination of Kamala's distracting shape-shifting and Izuku's silent takedowns. They reached the Central Command Center, a large, open warehouse space filled with computer terminals and a central assembly line. And there they saw it. Taskmaster wasn't just hiding out. He was building. Dozens of humanoid androids stood in charging alcoves along the walls. They were sleek, metallic skeletons, their featureless heads unnervingly human-shaped. On the assembly line, other androids were being fitted with armor plating. On a central monitor, combat data was streaming, footage of Captain America fighting, of the Winter Soldier on the freeway, of Black Widow in the Battle of New York. He's not just using the stolen tech for himself, Kate whispered, her voice tight with horror. He's mass-producing it. He's building an army of himself. He's demonstrating his capabilities to a buyer. Izuku realized, his blood running cold. The androids are the product. He copies the skills, uploads them to the bots, and sells perfect soldiers to the highest bidder. Before they could process the full, terrifying implications of this, the warehouse doors slammed shut with a deafening boom. The overhead lights flared to life, bathing the entire room in harsh, sterile white light. A familiar, metallic voice echoed from a loudspeaker. Did you really think I wouldn't have motion sensors? And quantum signature detectors? I've been expecting you. Taskmaster emerged from a side office, not in his combat gear, but in a simple tactical jumpsuit. He held a datapad in his hand, an amused tilt to his skull mask. Welcome, Vanguard, he said, the name dripping with mockery. I was hoping you'd show up. I needed some new combat data for the androids. Something fresh. As he spoke, the androids in the alcove stepped forward in perfect unison. Their optical sensors glowed a menacing red. There were at least 30 of them. You're overconfident, Izuku said, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. He settled into his stance, the others fanning out beside him. You think a bunch of robots can stop us? Oh, these aren't just robots, Taskmaster said, tapping his datapad. I've already uploaded the basics. The fighting styles of every SHIELD agent I've ever fought. Some HYDRA goons, a little bit of Batroc the Leaper for flavor. He looked directly at Izuku. And, of course, everything I've recorded from you three. The androids' heads all snapped towards them. They moved, not with robotic stiffness, but with the fluid, deadly grace of practiced fighters. The fight was a blur of motion and a symphony of chaos. The Vanguard fought brilliantly. They executed the strategies they had practiced. Kate used ricochet shots to disable multiple androids at once. Kamala turned her fist into massive wrecking balls, shattering bot after bot. Izuku was a green whirlwind, his kicks and punches precise and powerful. Ava, guided by Black Whip, became an untouchable specter, phasing through androids to rip out their power cores. They were winning. For about 90 seconds, then the androids adapted. An android facing Kate suddenly dropped its rifle and pulled a pair of batons, perfectly mimicking Black Widow's fighting style and overwhelming her in close quarters. Another one met Kamala's giant fist not with force, but by contorting its body in a perfect copy of a Spider-Man dodge, causing her to overextend. An android fighting Izuku perfectly executed his own Delaware smash air flick, staggering him. Another used his exact footwork from their fight in the lab to anticipate his kick and counter it. They were fighting a legion of taskmasters. For every android they destroyed, 2 more would take its place, their shared network instantly updating with the successful tactics of their fallen comrades. It was a battle of attrition they could not win. The tide turned when Ava, phasing through an android, cried out in pain. A blue arc of electricity erupted from the bot, coursing through her intangible form. "My new quantum disruptors," Taskmaster's voice announced calmly over the loudspeaker. "A little something I whipped up with the help of your converter. Can't hurt you much when you're phased, but it can disrupt the suit's energy field. Scrambles your anchor." Ava collapsed, her body flickering violently. She was vulnerable. Izuku saw it. He screamed her name and abandoned his own fight, rushing to her side. It was a fatal mistake. It broke their formation. The androids swarmed. Kate was disarmed and pinned by 3 androids mimicking Captain America's close-quarters combat. Kamala was entangled in electrified cables fired by a bot that had copied the Widow's bites. Izuku, shielding Ava's body with his own, was overwhelmed by sheer numbers. He fought with the desperate fury of a cornered animal, but it wasn't enough. A fist connected with his jaw. A kick swept his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs. An android's heavy metal boot planted itself on his chest, pinning him down. From the office, Taskmaster applauded slowly. "Excellent. A complete failure. All of it recorded for my buyers. Thank you for the demonstration." The vanguard was defeated. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and utterly crushed. Their training, their strategy, their teamwork, it hadn't been enough. Lying on the cold concrete floor, the weight of an android on his chest and the red glow of their optical sensors filling his vision, Izuku Midoriya felt a familiar, bitter taste in his mouth, the taste of overwhelming, catastrophic failure. Morale had never been lower.